What started as a reckless bet turns into an unexpected love story when billionaire Damien Sinclair marries his maid, Elena, as a joke, only to realize she's the one thing money can't buy. Will love overcome the lies? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Damien Sinclair's penthouse, illuminating the remains of last night's party. Empty champagne bottles, discarded glasses, and the faint scent of expensive cologne lingered in the air. Damien stepped over a sleeping friend on his way to the kitchen, his head pounding from too much drinking. "Good morning, Mr. Sinclair," said Mrs. Reynolds, his longtime housekeeper, her disapproving eyes taking in the mess. "Another successful gathering, I see." Damien flashed his trademark smile, the one that had graced countless magazine covers. At 35, he was one of the country's most eligible bachelors, tall with dark hair, piercing blue eyes, and a fortune that made women swoon. The best, Mrs. Reynolds. The absolute best. He grabbed a bottle of water from the refrigerator. "Could you get someone to clean this up?" "That's why I'm here, sir. To inform you that Jessica quit this morning. Said she couldn't handle another one of your gatherings." Damien shrugged. "Hire someone else, double the salary if necessary." Mrs. Reynolds sighed. "Already done, sir. The new maid starts today, the Hugh." Doorbell rang, and Mrs. Reynolds excused herself to answer it. Damien heard muffled voices in the hallway before she returned with a young woman. "Mr. Sinclair, this is Elena Carter, your new maid." Damien looked up and froze. She wasn't what he expected. Elena was in her late 20s, with warm brown eyes and chestnut hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore no makeup, and her clothes were practical rather than fashionable. But there was something about her, a quiet dignity, a spark in her eyes that caught his attention. "Miss Carter," he said, extending his hand. Elena hesitated before shaking it. "Mr. Sinclair." "Mrs. Reynolds explained my duties. I'll get started right away." As she turned to follow Mrs. Reynolds, Damien's phone rang. It was Victor, his best friend since college. "Damien, what a night, man. The guys are still talking about it. Listen, we're meeting for lunch at the plaza. You in?" "I'll be there," Damien said, his eyes still on Elena as she began collecting glasses from the living room. The Plaza Hotel's exclusive restaurant was filled with the usual crowd, wealthy businessmen, celebrities, and socialites. Damien joined Victor and their friends Jackson and Trevor at their regular table. "Here he is," Victor announced, raising his glass. "The man who knows how to live." Jackson leaned forward. "Heard the Carlton deal went through. Another $1 billion. In the bank, huh?" Damien shrugged. Success had become routine. "Just business." "Everything's just business with you," Trevor said. "When are you going to settle down like the rest of us?" Victor laughed. "Damien? Settle down? The day he gets married is the day I give up my Ferrari." "Marriage is for fools and romantics," Damien said, sipping his drink. "It's a contract, nothing more." "You've never been in love," Jackson said, "and I intend to keep it that way. Love complicates things." Damien signaled for another round of drinks. Victor's eyes suddenly gleamed with mischief. "What if we made it interesting? A bet?" Damien raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening. You're always saying marriage is just a contract, right? That it doesn't mean anything?" Victor looked around the table. "I bet you wouldn't have the guts to actually do it, get married as a joke." "To who?" Damien asked, amused by the idea. "Anyone. Someone random." "Someone who'd never fit into your world." Victor was warming to his idea. "Someone like your maid." The table erupted in laughter. Damien thought of Elena, with her serious eyes and simple clothes. "And what do I get when I win this bet?" he asked. Trevor whistled. "So you'd actually do it?" "Why not? It's just a piece of paper. I can get it annulled any time." "If you go through with it," Victor said, "and stay married for at least 6 months, I'll give you my vintage car collection." "And if I don't?" "You donate 10 million to the charity of our choice," Jackson chimed in. Damien considered it. 10 million was nothing to him, and the idea had a certain appeal. Outrageous, headline-making, and completely in character for the billionaire playboy the world expected him to be. "Deal," he said, raising his glass, "to my upcoming wedding." Back at the penthouse, Elena was finishing her work. The apartment was spotless. Not a trace of last night's party remained. She checked the time. She needed to pick up her siblings from school soon. "Impressive," Damien said, startling her. He'd been watching her from the doorway. "Thank you, Mr. Sinclair. I was just finishing up." She removed her cleaning gloves. "How long have you been a maid, Elena?" She straightened her shoulders. 3 years. Before that, I was in college, studying nursing. But when my parents died, I had to drop out to take care of my brother and sister. Damien hadn't expected that. "How old are they?" "Marco is 16 and Sophia is 12. And you support them on a maid's salary?" A flash of pride crossed her face. "I manage. We have each other. That's what matters." Something stirred in Damien. Curiosity, maybe. He was used to people who wanted something from him. Elena seemed different. "What if I offered you a better job?" he asked suddenly. Elena looked suspicious. "What kind of job?" "Be my wife." Her eyes widened. "Excuse me?" "It's simple. Marry me, live in my house, attend some events. After 6 months, we get divorced, and you walk away with $1 million. Enough to go back to school, take care of your siblings, buy a house, whatever you want." Elena stared at him. "Is this some kind of sick joke?" "It's a business proposal. You need money, I need a wife temporarily." He didn't mention the bet. "Why would you need a wife?" Damien improvised. "Tax purposes, public image. Does it matter? It's $1 million for 6 months of your time." Elena took a step back. "I'm not that desperate, Mr. Sinclair, and I'm not for sale." She grabbed her bag and headed for the door. $2 million, Damien called after her. He wasn't used to people saying no to him. "Think about what that could do for your siblings." Elena paused, her hand on the doorknob. She thought about Marco's college dreams, Sophia's medical bills from her asthma, the tiny apartment they shared. $2 million would change everything. "This would be just on paper?" she asked, not turning around. "Just paperwork. You'd have your own room. I'm hardly ever home anyway." That part was true. He spent most of his time traveling, working, or partying. Elena turned to face him. "If, and that's a big if, I were to consider this, I'd have conditions." Damien smiled. "Name them." "My siblings live with us. I continue my education, and you treat me with respect, no parading me around like some trophy." "Anything else?" "Yes. No one can know it's fake. Not your friends, not the press. No one." Damien thought about Victor's face when he showed up with a wife. "Deal." Elena took a deep breath. "I need to think about it. This is insane. Take your time, but not too much. I'm having a party this weekend. It would be the perfect time to announce our engagement." Elena couldn't believe she was even considering Damien's offer. She watched her siblings at dinner in their cramped apartment, thinking about what $2 million would mean for them. "You're quiet tonight," Marco said, helping with the dishes. "Just tired," she replied. How could she explain she was thinking? About marrying a billionaire as a business arrangement? After dinner, Sophia had another asthma attack. The inhaler helped, but Elena knew she needed better medical care they couldn't afford. That night, she made her decision. Damien's weekend party was in full swing when Elena arrived with Marco and Sophia. She'd explained to them that she was dating Damien, a simplified version of the truth. They were skeptical but excited about moving to a penthouse. "You came," Damien said, looking genuinely surprised. He was surrounded by beautiful people, all with drinks in hand. "I have conditions," Elena said quietly. "Written conditions. A contract." Damien grinned. "I knew I liked you for a reason." He took her hand and led her to the center of the room, tapping a knife against his glass for attention. "Everyone, I have an announcement." The room quieted. Damien's friends watched with curiosity. "I'd like you to meet Elena Carter, my fiancée." Gasps filled the room. Victor choked on his drink. "We're getting married next week," Damien continued, putting his arm around a stiff Elena. "Small ceremony, close friends only." Victor pushed through the crowd. "Damien, what the hell? Your maid? Is this about our bet?" Elena froze. "Bet?" Damien shot Victor a warning look. "Ignore him, he's drunk." But Elena pulled away. "What bet, Damien?" Before he could answer, Marco and Sophia appeared at Elena's side, sensing trouble. "Who are they?" Victor asked. "My brother and sister," Elena said coldly. "Who'll be living with us after the wedding?" She turned to Damien. "I need to speak with you privately." In Damien's office, Elena confronted him. "This is a bet? You're marrying me because of a bet with your rich friends?" Damien ran a hand through his hair. "It's not like that." "Well, it started that way, but what? You thought I wouldn't find out? That I'd be so grateful for your money I wouldn't care why you were really doing this. The reason doesn't matter. You still get everything we agreed on." Elena's eyes flashed with anger. "It matters to me. I won't be a joke for you and your friends." She turned to leave. "Wait," Damien said, grabbing her arm. Something in his voice made her stop. "I need this, and you need the money. Find someone else." "There is no one else." He hadn't meant to say it, but it was true. No one else had looked him in the eye and set conditions. No one else had seen through him so quickly. Elena studied his face. "If we do this, and that's still a big if, no one can ever know it started as a bet, not even your friends. As far as anyone knows, this is real." "Agreed. And you treat my siblings like family. They've lost enough already." Damien nodded. "One more thing," Elena said. "At the end of 6 months, you let me go without drama. No trying to keep me for appearances or any other reason. You have my word." Elena took a deep breath. "Then yes, I'll marry you. But this is a business arrangement, nothing more." They rejoined the party, where Victor immediately pulled Damien aside. "Are you serious about this? Marrying the maid?" Damien looked at Elena, who was introducing her siblings to Mrs. Reynolds. "Completely serious. And Victor? It's not about the bet anymore." "So drop it." Victor stared at him. "You're not actually falling for her, are you?" "Of course not," Damien scoffed. "But she's going to be my wife, so show some respect." Across the room, Eleanor watched Damien with his friends, wondering what she'd gotten herself into. This was just business, she reminded herself. 6 months, then freedom and security for her family. But as Damien caught her eye and smiled, a real smile, not the practiced one he used for photos, she felt a flutter of something unexpected. Something dangerous. This was definitely a mistake, but it was too late to back out now. The wedding was small, just as Damien had promised. Elena wore a simple white dress, with Sophia as her bridesmaid and Marco giving her away. Damien's friends served as groomsmen, still clearly shocked by the whole situation. "Do you, Damien Alexander Sinclair, take Elena Marie Carter to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the officiant asked. Damien looked at Elena. For a moment, just a moment, the world around them seemed to fade. "I do," he said, his voice steady. "And, do you, Elena Marie Carter, take Damien Alexander Sinclair to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Elena hesitated. This was her last chance to walk away. But then she thought of Sophia's medical bills, Marco's college applications, and the security Damien's money would provide. "I do," she said. "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Damien leaned in for what he intended to be a quick, formal kiss. But when their lips met, something unexpected happened. A spark, a connection neither had anticipated. The kiss deepened for a brief moment before Elena pulled away, her cheeks flushed. And just like that, they were married. At the small reception, Victor cornered Damien at the bar. "I can't believe you actually did it. You married your maid as a joke." "It's not a joke," Damien said firmly. "And keep your voice down." "What is it then?" Damien watched Elena dancing with her brother, laughing at something he said. "It's complicated." Victor followed his gaze. "Oh no, don't tell me you're actually starting to like her." "Don't be ridiculous," but Damien couldn't take his eyes off his new wife. Later that night, Damien showed Elena to her room in the penthouse. It was adjacent to his, with a connecting door that could be locked from either side. "Your siblings are down the hall. Mrs. Reynolds helped them get settled." He handed her a credit card. "For whatever you need, the pin is your birthday." Elena looked surprised. "You know my birthday?" It was in the paperwork. He didn't mention that he'd memorized it. "Thank you." she said stiffly. For everything. My siblings are happy. An awkward silence fell between them. They were strangers, married strangers. Well, good night then, Damien said. Good night, husband. The word sounded strange on Elena's lips. As Damien turned to go, Elena caught his arm. Damien, this doesn't have to be difficult. We can make the best of this situation. He looked down at her hand on his arm, then at her face. In that moment, something shifted between them. The beginning of a bridge across the vast divide that separated their worlds. Yes, he said quietly. I think we can. Neither of them realized it yet, but their joke of a marriage was about to become much more complicated than either had bargained for. The morning after the wedding, Elena woke up disoriented in her new bedroom. The king-sized bed and silk sheets were a far cry from her cramped apartment. For a moment, she forgot where she was, and that she was now married to one of America's wealthiest men. A soft knock on the door brought her back to reality. Come. In, she called, sitting up. Sophia peeked in, eyes wide with excitement. Elena, have you seen this place? My room has its own bathroom, and Marco's room has a gaming system. Elena smiled at her sister's enthusiasm. How did you sleep? Like a princess. Sophia bounced onto the bed. Is Damien really your husband now? It happened so fast. Yes, Elena said carefully. But remember what we talked about. This is a fresh start for all of us, but we need to be respectful of Damien's space. He seems nice, Sophia said. Not like those rich jerks on TV, Elena thought, about the bet that had started all this. Let's not judge him too quickly, okay? Later, Eleanor found Mrs. Reynolds in the kitchen preparing breakfast. Good morning, Mrs. Sinclair, the housekeeper said. Eleanor flinched at the name. Please call me Elena. Mrs. Reynolds gave her a knowing look. As you wish. Mr. Sinclair left early for a meeting, but he asked me to show you around and help you get settled. He also mentioned that you want to continue your education. Yes, nursing school. I had to drop out when my parents died. Mrs. Reynolds nodded. He's arranged for a meeting with an admissions counselor at Columbia this afternoon. The car will be ready at 2. Eleanor was stunned. She hadn't expected Damien to act on that request so quickly. I've also enrolled your sister in Westridge Academy and your brother at Bennington Prep, Mrs. Reynolds continued. Both excellent schools close by. But those are private schools, Eleanor said. They must cost a fortune, Mr. Sinclair insisted. The new school year starts next week. Mrs. Reynolds handed her a thick envelope. Your new IDs, bank cards, health insurance, everything you'll need. Mr. Sinclair has put $50,000 in your personal account for immediate expenses. Elena felt overwhelmed. Everything was moving so fast. Oh, and he's hosting a dinner. Party tomorrow night, Mrs. Reynolds added. To introduce you to his business associates. Mrs. Chen will be here at noon to help with your wardrobe. My wardrobe? Yes. Mr. Sinclair has arranged for a complete new wardrobe for you and your siblings. So Damien's morning had been filled with meetings, but he couldn't focus. His mind kept drifting back to the penthouse, to Eleanor and her siblings, now living in his space. It felt strange knowing they were there, changing the energy of a home that had always felt more like a hotel suite than a real place to live. Damien, are you listening? His CFO, Richard Miller, was staring at him impatiently. Sorry, what were you saying about the merger? Richard sighed. I was saying that Carlton Industries is getting nervous. They heard about your sudden marriage, and they're worried you might be making other impulsive decisions. Victor, who served as Damien's VP of marketing, snorted. It's not every day a billionaire marries his maid. Damien shot him a warning look. My marriage is not up for discussion in this boardroom, and you can assure Carlton that my personal life has no bearing on my business decisions. Speaking of your new wife, Richard continued, she'll need to sign the prenuptial agreement as soon as possible. Damien hesitated. A prenup wasn't part of his arrangement with Eleanor. In fact, a legal document spelling out the temporary nature of their marriage would undermine the entire facade. There is no prenup. The room fell silent. Are you insane? Richard finally asked. She could take half of everything you own. I trust Elena, Damien said, surprising himself with the truth of his words. Victor pulled him aside after the meeting. What game are you playing? First you marry her on a bet, Now you're risking your fortune. This isn't like you. Damien straightened his tie. Maybe I'm tired of being like me. And remember our agreement, as far as anyone knows, this is a real marriage. But it's not real, Victor pressed. It is legally, Damien snapped. Now drop it. Elena stood nervously in front of the full-length mirror in her bedroom. Mrs. Chen, a personal stylist, had spent hours with her, selecting evening gowns, casual wear, and everything in between. Now Eleanor was wearing a midnight blue gown that made her look like someone else entirely, someone who belonged in Damien's world. "Oh, you look beautiful," Sophia said from the doorway, wide-eyed. Elena turned, feeling self-conscious. "I feel like I'm playing dress-up." "Well, keep playing," came Damien's voice. He was standing behind Sophia, still in his business suit, his eyes fixed on Elena. "Because you look incredible." A blush crept up Elena's cheeks. "Thank you. How was your day?" "Long." He stepped into the room, his gaze still on her. "I see Mrs. Chen did a good job." "Too good. I feel like I'm in a costume." Damien's expression softened. "It's just clothes, Elena. They don't change who you are." He reached out, hesitated, then gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "The admissions counselor called. They're holding a spot for you in the nursing program." "Really?" Elena's face lit up. Thank you. "It's part of our deal," he said, but his smile was genuine. "I also had my assistant set up tuition accounts for Marco and Sophia for college when they're ready." Sophia, who had been watching their exchange with interest, suddenly hugged Damien. "Thank you." Damien froze, clearly not used to such displays of affection. Awkwardly, he patted Sophia's head. "You're welcome." Elena watched, a strange warmth spreading through her chest. This wasn't what she had expected from their arrangement. "I should go," Damien said, gently disentangling himself from Sophia. "Early meeting tomorrow, but you look beautiful, Elena." "Really?" He left quickly, as if afraid to stay any longer. Sophia turned to Elena with a grin. "He likes you." "It's not like that," Elena insisted, but her reflection in the mirror revealed her flushed cheeks. The dinner party the next evening was Elena's first real test as Mrs. Sinclair. Damien's penthouse was filled with business associates, society friends, and curious onlookers, all eager to meet the woman who had captured the notorious bachelor. "Ready?" Damien asked, offering his arm as they prepared to enter the living room. Elena took a deep breath. "As I'll ever be." He squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Just be yourself. That's who I married." "For show," she reminded him in a whisper. A flicker of something, disappointment, crossed his face. "Right." The evening was a blur of introductions, small talk, and scrutiny. Elena could feel people evaluating her, wondering what Damien saw in her. To their credit, most of Damien's business associates were polite, if reserved. "So how did you two meet?" asked Clarissa Hampton, the wife of one of Damien's investors, her eyes sharp with curiosity. "She worked for me," Damien said smoothly, his arm around Elena's waist. "One day I looked at her, really looked, and realized I couldn't imagine my life without her." The way he said it with such conviction almost made Elena believe it herself. "How romantic," Clarissa said, not sounding convinced. "And what did you do before, Elena? Before becoming Mrs. Sinclair?" "I was studying nursing," Elena replied. "Actually, I'm continuing my education now." "How ambitious," Clarissa said with a thin smile. "Most women would. Be content to enjoy Damien's fortune." "Elena's not most women," Damien said firmly. "That's why I married her." Later, as the party was winding down, Elena overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. "It won't last," a woman was saying. "Victor told James it started as a bet. Can you believe it? Damien Sinclair married his maid because of a drunk bet with his friends." Eleanor felt like she'd been slapped. So people did know. Despite Damien's promise, their marriage was a joke to his social circle. She found Damien in conversation with a business partner and pulled him aside. "I need to speak with you now." In his office, she confronted him. "You promised no one would know about the bet, yet I just overheard someone talking about it." Damien looked genuinely surprised. Who? Does it matter? Your friends are talking. Damien making us into a joke. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. I'll handle it, I promise. How? You can't take back what people already know. Tears stung her eyes. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? To know people are looking at me, thinking I'm just some pawn in your game? It's not like that anymore, Damien said quietly. Then what is it like? Elena challenged. What exactly am I to you? Damien stepped closer. I don't know, he admitted, but it's not what it was when we made the deal. You must know that. The intensity in his eyes made Elena step back. This is a business arrangement, Damien. We agreed. 6 months, then I walk away with the money, nothing more. And if I want more? The question hung in the air between them. Elena shook her head. You don't. You're just confused because I'm not falling at your feet like all the other women in your life. You're right about one thing, he said. You're not like any other woman I've known. But you're wrong if you think what I feel is confusion. Before Eleanor could respond, there was a knock at the door. Marco poked his head in. Eleanor, Sophia's having trouble with her breathing. I can't find her inhaler. Eleanor immediately switched focus. I'll be right there. She turned back to Damien. We'll finish this conversation later, but they didn't. Sophia's asthma attack was severe enough that they ended up in the emergency room, with Damien insisting on coming along. He sat beside Elena in the waiting room, their earlier argument temporarily forgotten. She'll be okay, he assured her, squeezing her hand. The doctors here are the best. Eleanor was too worried to pull her hand away. This happens sometimes, usually not this bad. Why didn't you tell me her condition was serious? It's managed with medication, usually. Damien looked troubled. Elena, you don't have to handle everything alone anymore. That's part of why we did this, remember? So you wouldn't have to carry this burden by yourself. Elena felt a lump in her throat. In that moment, with Damien's hand warm in hers and his eyes full of genuine concern, their arrangement felt like something else entirely. The doctor emerged with good news. Sophia was stabilized and could go home with a new treatment, plan and better medication. Damien took charge, ensuring they had everything they needed and arranging for a specialist to see Sophia the following week. It was nearly morning by the time they returned to the penthouse. Marco took Sophia to her room to rest, leaving Elena and Damien alone. Thank you, Elena said sincerely, for everything tonight. I told you we're in this together. Damien hesitated, then added, about what I said earlier. Let's not do this now, Elena said, suddenly exhausted. It's been a long night. Damien nodded, respecting her wish. Get some rest. But Elena... He waited until she met his eyes. You're not alone anymore. Remember that. As she watched him walk away, Elena felt the walls she'd built around her heart begin to crack. The next few weeks fell into an unexpected rhythm. Elena started classes at Columbia, thriving in the nursing program. Sophia and Marco adjusted to their new schools, making friends and excelling academically. And Damien, to everyone's surprise, began coming home earlier, often joining them for dinner. One evening, Elena was studying at the dining room table when Damien arrived home, looking tired from a long day. How's the studying going? He asked, loosening his tie and sitting across from her. Good, anatomy exam tomorrow, she glanced up at him. You're home early again. The office isn't as appealing as it used to be. He looked around the apartment where signs of life had gradually appeared. Sophia's art on the refrigerator, Marco's sneakers by the door, Elena's textbooks on the coffee table. It's different here now. I'm sorry if we've disrupted your space, Elena began. No, Damien said quickly. That's not what I meant. It's different in a good way. Before, this was just a place to sleep. Now it feels like a home, Elena supplied. He nodded, his eyes warm. Yes, a home. The moment was interrupted by Mrs. Reynolds, who entered with a troubled expression. Mr. Sinclair, there's someone here to see you. A Miss Allison Winters. Damien's face changed immediately. Tell her I'm not available. I'm afraid she's quite insistent, Mrs. Reynolds said apologetically. She's already in the living room. Elena saw Damien's jaw tighten. Who's Allison Winters? She asked. My ex, he said grimly. We dated for 2 years. It ended badly. I should go, Elena said, gathering her books. No, Damien's hand covered hers. Stay, please, you're my wife. The emphasis he placed on the word wife made Elena's heart skip. Together they went to the living room where a stunning blonde, in a designer dress, was examining the family photos that now adorned the mantel. Photos that included Eleanor and her siblings. Damien, Alison purred, turning with a practiced smile that faltered when she saw Eleanor. Oh, I didn't realize you had company. Alison, what are you doing here? Damien's voice was cold. I heard the most extraordinary rumor, that you'd gotten married. Her eyes flicked to Elena, dismissive. Clearly that can't be true. It is. True, Damien said, putting his arm around Elena's waist. Alison, this is my wife, Elena. Alison's laugh was brittle. Your wife? Damien, darling, what kind of game are you playing? Everyone knows this started as a bet with Victor. Elena tensed, but Damien's arm tightened around her. The only mistake I made was telling Victor anything, Damien said evenly. Yes, he dared me to marry someone unexpected. But what he, and apparently you, don't understand is that I fell in love with Elena. The bet just gave me the push I needed. To act on it! Elena looked up at him in surprise. This wasn't part of their script. Alison's eyes narrowed. You expect me to believe you're in love with her? After you told me you'd never marry anyone? I told you I'd never marry you, Damien corrected. There's a difference. I see. Alison's voice was icy. Well, congratulations on your charming little family. I'm sure the novelty will wear off soon enough. She headed for the door, then paused. By the way, the Carlton deal? I'd check that partnership agreement more carefully if I were you. Daddy found some interesting clauses. After she left, Eleanor stepped away from Damien. What was that about? Alison's father is on the board at Carlton Industries. The deal we're working on would essentially push him out. Damien shrugged. Just business. And what you said about falling in love with me, was that just business too? Damien met her gaze steadily. What do you think? I think you're a very good actor. Eleanor said, her heart racing. But we had an agreement. Agreements can change, he said softly. People can change. Elena shook her head. I need to study. She retreated to her room, closing the door firmly behind her. But instead of opening her textbooks, she sat on the edge of the bed, hands trembling. This wasn't supposed to happen. She wasn't supposed to feel this way, this confusion, this longing, this fear. She had entered this marriage with clear eyes and a practical mind. It was a business deal, nothing more. So why did Damien's words make her feel like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, both terrified and exhilarated by the thought of falling? The next morning, Damien was already gone when Elena emerged from her room. A note on the kitchen counter explained he had an early meeting and wouldn't be home until late. Eleanor was relieved. She needed time to sort out her feelings. Her phone rang as she was preparing to leave for class. It was Victor. Eleanor, is Damien with you? He's not answering his phone. He left early for a meeting, she said. Why? What's wrong? Victor hesitated. The Carlton deal is falling apart. There was an emergency board meeting this morning, but Damien never showed up. Alarm bells rang in Elena's mind. That's not like him. He said the meeting was important. That's what I thought. And with Alison's father making moves against him, Elena remembered Alison's veiled threat. I'll try to reach him. But Damien didn't answer her calls either. By afternoon, with still no word, Elena was worried enough to skip her class and head to Damien's office. The reception area was chaotic, with phones ringing and staff looking stressed. Elena approached the receptionist. I'm looking for Damien. Sinclair. The young woman looked up, recognition dawning. Mrs. Sinclair, thank goodness you're here. Mr. Sinclair asked specifically for you. He's here? Elena asked, relieved. In the conference room. The board meeting just ended. Elena found Damien surrounded by serious-looking men in suits. His face brightened when he saw her. Elena, he said, coming to her side. I'm sorry I didn't call you back. It's been a crazy day. Is everything okay? Victor called. Everything's fine now. He turned to the men. Gentlemen, this is my wife, Elena. The oldest man stepped forward, extending his hand. "Mrs. Sinclair, your husband is quite the negotiator. He just saved this company from a hostile takeover." Elena shook his hand, confused. "I don't understand." "Alison's father tried to use some obscure clauses in our agreement to gain control," Damien explained, "but I found a loophole." "A brilliant loophole," the older man added. "The clause only applied if Mr. Sinclair remained unmarried. His recent change in status invalidated the entire section." Elena stared at Damien. "So our marriage saved my company," he finished. "It seems I have more reasons to thank you than I realized." Later, in Damien's private office, Elena confronted him. "Did you know about this clause? Is that why you proposed this arrangement?" Damien looked genuinely surprised. "No, I had no idea until my lawyers uncovered it this morning. It was just a fortunate coincidence." "So the bet with your friends was real?" "Yes," he admitted. "But Eleanor, what started as a stupid bet has become the best decision I've ever made." She searched his face for signs of deception, but found only sincerity. "I don't know what to believe." "Any more, Damien?" He stepped closer, his gaze intense. "Believe this, I'm not the same man who made that bet. The man who thought marriage was just a contract, that love was for fools. You changed that. You changed me." "Damien, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "We still have our agreement, but I wanted you to know that for me, this stopped being a game a long time ago." Elena didn't know how to respond. Part of her wanted to believe him, wanted to admit that her feelings had changed too. But another part, the practical part that had kept her and her siblings safe all these years, warned her to be careful. "I need time," she finally said. Damien nodded. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." He smiled, the gentle smile that was becoming increasingly familiar. "After all, we still have 4 more months of our agreement." As Elena left his office, she found herself hoping for the first time that 6 months wouldn't be the end of their story, but just the beginning. The autumn air turned crisp as September gave way to October. 3 months had passed since Eleanor and Damien's wedding, and life in the Sinclair penthouse had fallen into a comfortable routine. Marco and Sophia thrived in their new schools, Eleanor excelled in her nursing program, and Damien, to everyone's surprise, had become a regular presence at family dinners. Tonight, Elena was cooking her mother's famous paella, a skill she rarely had time to showcase in her previous life. "That smells amazing," Damien said, entering the kitchen after work. He'd started coming home earlier, often before 7. "It was my mom's recipe," Elena replied, stirring the saffron-infused rice. "She taught me when I was Sophia's age." Damien leaned against the counter, watching her. "You never talk about your parents." Elena's hand stilled for a moment. "It's still hard. They died in a car accident 2 years ago. That's when I had to drop out of school to take care of Marco and Sophia." "I'm sorry," Damien said quietly. "I know what it's like to lose family." Elena looked up in surprise. Damien rarely spoke about his past. "Your parents?" "My mother died when I was 12, cancer." His expression grew distant. "My father, well, he was never the same after that. He threw himself into work, built the company into what it is today. But at home, he was just a ghost. He had a heart attack 5 years ago." "That why you work so much? Continuing his legacy?" Damien considered the question. "Maybe, or maybe I just never had a reason to come home before." The simple statement hung in the air between them, weighted with unspoken meaning. Elena felt her cheeks warm under his steady gaze. "I should check on the paella," she said, turning back to the stove. Damien smiled, a gentle expression she was still getting used to. "I'll set the table." Dinner was lively, with Marco excitedly sharing news about making the soccer team and Sophia showing off her science project. Watching them interact with Damien, laughing and comfortable, Elena felt a pang of something unexpected, like they were becoming a real family. It was dangerous to think that way, she reminded herself. This was temporary, no matter what Damien had said about his feelings changing. After dinner, when the kids had gone to finish homework, Elena and Damien lingered at the table, sharing a bottle of wine. "I've been meaning to ask you something," Damien said, My company's annual charity gala is next weekend. As CEO, I have to be there, and as my wife. You want me to attend? Elena finished. Yes. It's important for the company, but I understand if you're uncomfortable. Eleanor thought about the last social event, the dinner party where she'd overheard people talking about the bet. Will Victor be there? Damien's expression tightened. Yes, but we've talked. He understands how important this is to me. How important. You are. The sincerity in his voice made her heart flutter. Okay, she agreed, but I'll need a new dress. Damien smiled. Already taken care of. Mrs. Chen will bring some options tomorrow. You were that sure I'd say yes? No, he admitted, but I was hopeful. The morning of the gala, Elena received a strange call. Mrs. Sinclair? An unfamiliar female voice came through the phone. This is Janet from Cherish Memories. Photography. I'm calling to confirm your appointment for the family portrait session this afternoon. I think there's been a mistake, Elena said. I didn't schedule a portrait session. Oh, the woman sounded confused. Mr. Sinclair arranged it as a surprise. It's your 3-month wedding anniversary, isn't it? Elena was stunned. It was their anniversary, but she hadn't expected Damien to remember, let alone plan something. Yes, it is. What time is the appointment? 3 o'clock at Riverside Park. Mr. Sinclair said it's where you first realized you had feelings for him. Eleanor frowned. They had never been to Riverside Park together. Thank you. We'll be there. She hung up, puzzled. Why would Damien make up a story about Riverside Park? Unless the doorbell rang. When Elena answered, she found a flower delivery, a stunning arrangement of calla lilies, her favorite. The card read, Happy Anniversary. Meet me at Riverside. Park at 3, wear the blue dress. Now she was really confused. How did he know calla lilies were her favorite? She'd never told him that. At 3 o'clock, Elena arrived at Riverside Park in the blue dress Damien had mentioned, a simple, elegant sundress she'd bought with her own money weeks ago. Marco and Sophia were with her, equally confused but excited about the mystery. They found Damien waiting near the lake, dressed casually in jeans and a light sweater, a stark contrast to his usual business attire. Beside him stood a photographer with professional equipment. There you are, Damien said, smiling warmly. His eyes lingered on Elena in the blue dress. You look beautiful. What's this about? Elena asked. And how did you know about the calla lilies? I pay attention, he said simply. And this is about making memories, real ones, not just for show. The photographer took family portraits of the 4 of them against the backdrop of autumn leaves. It felt strangely natural. Damien with his arm around Elena's waist, Sophia and Marco laughing as Damien told terrible jokes to make them smile for the camera. After the session, Damien surprised them with a picnic by the lake. As the kids explored, nearby he turned to Elena. I never answered your question about Riverside Park, he said. The photographer said. It's where I first realized I had feelings for you. Damien looked out over the water. I wanted us to have a real memory here, something true, just for us. Damien, I know, he interrupted gently. You still need time, and that's okay. But I wanted to do something special for our anniversary, something that wasn't about the arrangement or the bet. Something real. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. How had this happened? How had their fake marriage become more genuine than anything she'd experienced before? Thank you, she said softly, allowing herself to lean against his shoulder. Just for today, she decided she could let herself enjoy this, enjoy them. The charity gala was held at the luxurious Plaza Hotel. Elena wore a stunning emerald gown that made her eyes shine. As she and Damien entered the grand ballroom, heads turned. No longer was she the out-of-place maid playing dress-up. Tonight, Elena looked every inch Mrs. Sinclair, her arm linked confidently with her husband's. You're stealing the show, Damien whispered as they greeted guests. Only because of this dress, she deflected. No, he said firmly, because of you. The evening progressed smoothly. Elena found herself genuinely enjoying conversations with Damien's business associates and their spouses. To her surprise, many seemed to have forgotten or chosen to ignore the circumstances of their marriage, treating her with respect. Even Victor was on his best behavior, greeting Elena warmly and keeping any skepticism to himself. She was beginning to think the night would pass without incident when she spotted a familiar face across the room. Alison Winters, looking stunning in a red dress that left little to the imagination. "What is she doing here?" Elena asked, tensing. Damien followed her gaze and frowned. "Her father's company donates to the charity. I couldn't exclude her without making a scene." "She's coming this way," Elena warned. Alison approached with a predatory smile. "Damien, darling, and Elena, was it? Still playing house, I see." "Enjoying the evening, Alison?" Damien asked coolly. "Very much, especially since Daddy told Hamis about the impending announcement." Her eyes gleamed with malice. "Such exciting news deserves a celebration." Elena looked at Damien questioningly, but his expression revealed nothing. "If you'll excuse us," he said to Alison, guiding Elena away. "What announcement was she talking about?" Elena asked once they were alone. Damien looked troubled. "There's a rumor that Carlton Industries is planning a major restructuring. If it's true, it could affect our partnership." "Is that bad?" "Potentially very bad, but we won't know until tomorrow." He squeezed her hand. "Let's not let it ruin our evening." They tried to enjoy the rest of the gala, but Elena noticed Damien checking his phone frequently. Around 11, he received a call that took him away from the dance floor. When he returned, his face was grim. "We need to go," he said quietly. "There's an emergency board meeting at midnight." In the car, Elena asked, "Is it about Carlton?" Damien nodded, his face illuminated by the passing streetlights. "Someone leaked confidential information about our partnership. The board is in panic mode." "Alison's father?" "Probably. This could cost the company millions." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "I'm sorry to cut the evening short." "Don't apologize," Elena said. "Your company is important." Damien looked at her. "Not as important as some things." At the penthouse, Elena changed out of her gown, while Damien prepared for his meeting. Before he left, he found her in the kitchen making tea. "This might be a long night," he said. "Don't wait up." "Is there anything I can do?" she asked. He hesitated, then took her hands in his. "You've already done it. Just being here, being you, it helps more than you know." The sincerity in his eyes made her breath catch. Impulsively, she stood on tiptoe and kissed his cheek. "Good luck." Damien looked momentarily stunned, then a slow smile spread across his face. "That's all the luck I need." After he left, Elena couldn't sleep. She waited up, watching the news for any mention of Sinclair Industries or Carlton. Around 3 in the morning, her phone rang. It was Damien. "I woke you," he said, sounding exhausted. "No, I was awake. What happened?" "It's worse than we thought. Carlton is pulling out of the partnership completely. There's going to be a major hit to our stock when the markets open." "I'm sorry," Elena said. "Is there anything that can be done?" There was a long pause. "Maybe. But it would mean traveling to their headquarters in Chicago. Tonight. How long would you be gone?" "A few days, possibly a week." Another pause. "Elena, I was hoping you might come with me." The request surprised her. "Me? What could I do? Carlton's CEO is old-fashioned. He values family. If he sees us together, it might help him reconsider." "So I'd be playing the dutiful wife," Elena said, trying to hide her disappointment. For a moment, she'd thought he wanted her company for other reasons. "That's not—" Damien sighed. "Yes, it would look good for negotiations, but that's not the only reason I'm asking. I'd like you there, with me." The vulnerability in his voice melted her resistance. "When do we leave?" "The company jet is being fueled now. Can you be ready in an hour?" "What about Marco and Sophia?" "Mrs. Reynolds can stay with them. It's just for a few days." Elena agreed, and soon they were on Damien's private jet, flying through the night toward Chicago. The luxury of the aircraft would have impressed her a few months ago, but now she was more concerned with Damien's tense expression as he reviewed documents. "You should rest," she told him. "You've been up all night." "Too much at stake," he murmured. But his exhaustion was evident. "Come here," she said, patting the seat next to her. When he joined her, she gently took the papers from his hands. "Close your eyes, just for a few minutes." To her surprise, he complied, leaning back against the seat. Soon his breathing deepened. Without thinking, Eleanor guided his head to rest on her shoulder. He shifted in his sleep, one arm instinctively wrapping around her waist. As the plane carried them through the night sky, Elena watched Damien's sleeping face, so much more vulnerable than his waking expression. How had this happened? How had their fake marriage, built on a bet and a business deal, led to these genuine feelings? Because they were genuine, she finally admitted to herself. Somewhere between his kindness to her siblings and moments like this, when he trusted her enough to show his vulnerability, she had fallen for the real Damien, not the billionaire playboy the world knew. But could she trust these feelings? Could she trust him? The question followed her as she drifted into sleep, still cradling Damien against her shoulder. They arrived in Chicago at dawn. A car was waiting to take them directly to the Carlton headquarters, where emergency meetings were already underway. In the back seat, Damien held Elena's hand tightly. "Thank you for coming," he said. "No matter what happens in there, knowing you're with me makes a difference." The Carlton building was an imposing glass tower in downtown Chicago. As they entered the lobby, Eleanor felt out of place in her hastily packed clothes, surrounded by executives in perfect suits. But Damien kept her close, his hand at the small of her back, guiding her with a confidence that helped calm her nerves. The boardroom was tense when they arrived. Harold Carlton, the aging CEO, sat at the head of the table, his face a mask of disapproval. Beside him sat his daughter Allison, who barely concealed her smirk at the sight of Eleanor. "Mr. Sinclair," Harold said coldly, "I wasn't expecting you to bring company." "My wife," Damien corrected firmly. "Elena, this is Harold Carlton. Harold, my wife, Elena Sinclair." Elena shook the older man's hand, meeting his evaluating gaze with dignity. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Carlton, though I wish it were under better circumstances." Something in her sincerity seemed to register with Harold. He nodded, then gestured for them to sit. The meeting was grueling. For hours, Damien and Harold's team debated terms, reviewed documents, and argued about the future of their partnership. Elena stayed quiet, observing the dynamics. She noticed how Allison kept whispering to her father, her eyes sharp with malice whenever she looked at Damien. During a break, Elena found herself alone with Harold in the corridor. The older man studied her curiously. "You're not what I expected," he said bluntly. "When I heard Damien Sinclair had married his maid, I assumed it was another of his publicity stunts." Elena tensed. "Our marriage is private, not a publicity stunt. Is that so?" Harold's eyes were shrewd. "My daughter tells a different story, something about a bet." Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "With all due respect, Mr. Carlton, your daughter and I have very different perspectives on my husband." "Because she used to date him?" "Because she doesn't know him," Elena said simply. "Not really." Harold seemed surprised by her response. "And you do?" Eleanor thought about Damien, not the public figure or the billionaire, but the man who read bedtime stories to Sophia, who helped Marco with his science project, who held her hand during her sister's asthma attack. "Yes," she said with quiet confidence, "I do." Harold considered this. "You know, Mrs. Sinclair, I've been in business a long time. I've seen men like your husband come and go, ambitious, ruthless, willing to do whatever it takes to win. Damien is ambitious," Elena agreed, "but he's also fair. He wants this partnership to work because it benefits both companies, not just his. That's what they all say, but not all of them mean it." Elena hesitated, then continued. "Mr. Carlton, I don't understand all the business details, but I know my husband. If he made a commitment to you, he'll honor it." Harold studied her for a long moment. "You really believe in him, don't you?" "With all my heart," Elena said, surprising herself with the truth of her words. When the meeting resumed, Elena noticed a subtle shift in Harold's demeanor. He was still tough, still driving a hard bargain, but the outright hostility had diminished. By evening, they had reached a tentative agreement to preserve most of the partnership, though with new terms that would require Damien's board approval. In the car afterward, Damien looked both exhausted and relieved. That went better than expected. We salvaged most of the deal. That's good, right? Very good. He took her hand. And I think I have you to thank. Eleanor looked surprised. Me? I hardly said anything. Harold mentioned your conversation. Whatever you said made an impression. He traced a pattern on her palm. What exactly did you tell him? The truth, Eleanor said softly. That you're a man of your word. Damien's eyes darkened with emotion. And am I? A man of my word? The question held layers of meaning. Eleanor thought about their arrangement, his promise that she could walk away after 6 months with the money. No strings attached. But she also thought about how much had changed, how different things felt now. Yes, she finally said, you are. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Then believe me when I say this, Elena Sinclair. What began as a business arrangement has become the most real thing in my life. Her heart raced at his words, at the intensity in his gaze. But before she could respond, his phone rang, the board calling for an update. The moment broke, but the feeling lingered, a warmth that spread through Eleanor's chest and refused to fade. Their hotel suite was luxurious, with a stunning view of Lake Michigan. After ordering room service, they sat on the balcony, watching the city lights shimmer on the water. I never thought I'd be here, Elena mused. In Chicago, in a 5-star hotel, married to a billionaire. Having second thoughts? Damien asked, his tone light but his eyes watchful. No, she said honestly, just amazed at how life changes. 6 months ago, I was cleaning houses and worrying about making rent. And now? Eleanor smiled. Now I'm in nursing school, my siblings are thriving, and I'm having dinner with my husband in Chicago. Husband, Damien repeated, savoring the word. I never thought I'd like the sound of that. The notorious bachelor tamed at last, Eleanor teased. Not tamed, he corrected. Changed, for the better. Their eyes met, and something shifted in the air between them. Eleanor felt it, a pull, a connection that went beyond their arrangement. Damien's gaze dropped to her lips, then back up to her eyes, a question in his expression. Elena's phone rang, breaking the moment. It was Marco checking in. As she assured her brother that everything was fine, Damien moved back inside, giving her privacy. By the time she finished the call, something had changed. Damien was more reserved, maintaining a careful distance as they finished dinner. Eleanor wondered if she'd imagined the moment on the balcony, if she'd misread his intentions. Should get some sleep, Damien said after they'd eaten. Early meeting tomorrow. Of course, Elena said, hiding her disappointment. The suite had 2 bedrooms. As they stood in the living area, there was an awkward moment, the first they'd experienced in weeks. Damien hesitated, as if wanting to say something more, then simply wished her good night and retreated to his room. Elena lay awake in her bed, replaying the day. What had happened? Why had Damien pulled back when they seemed to be getting closer? Was he having second thoughts about his feelings, or was he simply respecting the terms of their original agreement? Around midnight, she gave up on sleep and went to the living room for a glass of water. To her surprise, Damien was there, staring out at the city lights, a troubled expression on his face. Can't sleep either, she asked softly. He turned, and the raw emotion in his eyes caught her off guard. Elena, he said, his voice rough, I need to tell you something. Her stomach tightened with anxiety. What is it? Today, when you were talking, to Harold, you said you believed in me, that I was a man of my word. I meant it, she said, but that's just it. Damien ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she now recognized as a sign of his distress. I've been lying to you. Elena felt. The blood drained from her face. About what? About the bet. About why I really wanted to marry you. He took a deep breath. It wasn't just a drunk dare. Victor bet me I couldn't make anyone fall in love with me for real, especially someone who knew the truth about who I am. Someone who wasn't after my money. I don't understand, Elena said, feeling suddenly cold. The original bet was to marry you as a joke, yes, but there was more. His eyes held hers, pleading for understanding. Victor bet that no woman would ever truly love me for myself. So I had to find someone who knew the marriage was fake, who had no illusions about me and Make her fall in love with me anyway. Eleanor felt like she'd been slapped. So everything, the kindness to my siblings, the school tuition, the family photos, all of it, was to manipulate me? To win a bet? No! Damien moved toward her, but she backed away. That's what I'm trying to tell you. It started that way, but then I got to know you and everything changed. I changed. How can I believe that? Elena demanded, tears stinging her eyes. How can I trust anything you say now? Because I'm telling you the truth, even though it might cost me everything. His voice broke. Because I fell in love with you, Elena, for real. I love your strength, your loyalty to your family, the way you see through all my defenses. Eleanor shook her head, the pain in her chest almost unbearable. You lied to me from the beginning. You were playing games with my life, with my heart. Yes, Damien admitted, his face anguished. And I will regret that for the rest of my life, but my feelings for you are real. What we've built together, that's real. I need to think, Elena said, wiping away tears. I need space. Damien nodded, respecting her wishes despite the desperation in his eyes. I understand, take all the time you need, but please, Elena, don't give up on us yet. As Elena returned to her room, closing the door behind her, she felt her heart breaking. She had fallen in love with Damien, the real Damien she'd come to know over these months. But how could she trust that person existed when their entire relationship was built on an even bigger lie than she'd realized? Outside her door, Damien stood for a long time, his hand raised as if to knock, then lowered it again. He had finally found something real, something precious, and in his honesty he might have lost it forever. The flight back to New York was unbearably quiet. Elena and Damien sat on opposite sides of the private jet, the distance between them more than just physical. Elena stared out the window, watching clouds drift beneath them, her mind replaying Damien's confession over and over. A bet to make her fall in love with him. Everything built on manipulation and lies. Yet she couldn't deny that something real had grown between them. She'd seen it in the way Damien cared for Sophia during her asthma attack, in his patience helping Marco with homework, in the vulnerable moments they'd shared talking about their parents. Could all of that have been an act? Her heart said no, but her trust had been shattered. As the plane began its descent into New York, Damien finally broke the silence. When we get home, he said quietly, I can stay at a hotel if that would make things easier for you. Home. The word felt like a knife twist. The penthouse had begun to feel like home, but now that too seemed like part of the illusion. No, Elena replied, her voice steadier than she felt. The children would ask questions. We need time to figure this out. Damien nodded, the relief in his eyes overshadowed by lingering guilt. Whatever you want, Elena. I meant what I said last night. I'll do anything to make this right. I don't know if that's possible, she said honestly. The car ride from the airport continued in tense silence. When they arrived at the penthouse, Marco and Sophia greeted them enthusiastically, unaware of the fracture between them. Elena forced a smile, her heart aching at the thought of disrupting their newfound stability. How was Chicago? Marco asked. Over dinner, looking between them. Cold, Elena replied, but beautiful. Did Damien save his company? Sophia asked with the directness of a 12-year-old. Damien managed a small smile. We worked things out. I knew you would, Sophia said with complete confidence. Elena says you always find a way to fix problems. Damien's eyes found Elena's across the table, seeking confirmation of these words. She looked away, unable to bear the hope in his gaze. After the children went to bed, Elena retreated to her room, needing space to think. But the penthouse felt suffocating now, filled with memories of moments she no longer knew were genuine. On impulse, she called her friend Lucia, who had been her support system before the marriage. I need to get out, Elena said when Lucia answered. Can I come over? An hour later, Elena was sitting in Lucia's modest apartment, pouring out the whole story. The original arrangement, how her feelings had changed, and finally, Damien's confession about the true nature of the bet. So, let me get this straight, Lucia said when Elena finished. He married you on a bet, but then actually fell in love with you for real. That's what he claims, Elena said, wiping away tears. But how can I believe him? How can I trust anything he says now? Lucia considered this. I get why you're hurt. But Elena, I've seen you these past months. You've been happier than I've ever known you. Not because of the money or the fancy penthouse, but because of him, because of the family you were becoming. It was all based on a lie, Elena insisted. The fool. Beginning was, Lucia agreed. But what about everything since? The way he takes care of Sophia and Marco. The way he looks at you when you're not watching? How do you know how he looks at me? I saw you both at that school fundraiser last month, remember? Elena, that man is in love with you. Maybe it didn't. Start honestly, but it grew into something real. Elena shook her head, tears threatening again. I don't know what to believe anymore. What does your heart tell you? Lucia asked gently. That I love him, Elena admitted, the words painful to speak aloud. But is that real, or is it just what he wanted me to feel all along? Only you can answer that, Lucia said. But ask yourself this. If he was just trying to win a bet, why confess the truth now? He could have kept silent, let the 6 months pass and claimed his victory. Why risk losing you unless he genuinely cares? It was a question Elena couldn't answer. Back at the penthouse, Damien paced his bedroom, unable to sleep. The look of betrayal in Elena's eyes haunted him. He'd known the truth would hurt her, but keeping it secret any longer had been unbearable. He loved her too much to continue the deception, even if honesty meant losing her. His phone chimed with a text from Victor. Heard the Carlton deal is back on. Dinner to celebrate? Damien stared at the message, anger building in his chest. Victor's stupid bet had started all this, had nearly cost him the only thing that truly mattered now, Elena's. Love, he typed back, we need to talk. My office tomorrow. The next day, Damien waited until Eleanor had left for classes before heading to his office. He'd barely slept, spending most of the night trying to think of ways to repair the damage he'd done. But first, he needed to settle things with Victor. His friend was waiting in Damien's office, looking puzzled by the urgent summons. What's going on? Victor asked. You look terrible. I told Elena the truth, Damien said bluntly, about the real bet. Victor's face fell. Damn. How'd she take it? How do you think? Damien shot back. She's devastated. She thinks everything between us was manipulation. Wasn't it in the beginning? Victor asked, then raised his hands defensively at Damien's glare. Sorry, but you did marry her to win the bet. And it was the biggest mistake of my life, Damien said, his voice tight with emotion. Not marrying her, that was the one thing I did right, but lying about why, letting her believe it was just a simple dare rather than a calculated plan to make her fall in love with me. Victor studied his friend with growing understanding. You really do love her, more than anything. Damien ran a hand through his disheveled hair. And now I might lose her because of a stupid bet. So what are you going to do? Damien looked out the window at the New York skyline. Whatever it takes to win her back, starting with this. He turned back to Victor, his expression resolved. The bet is off. You win. What, just like that? Just like that. I don't care about winning anymore. I don't care about the cars or the money or any of it. I just want Elena to know that what I feel for her is real. Victor was silent for a moment, then nodded. For what it's worth, I think she's the best thing that ever happened to you. The old Damien wouldn't have given up a bet for anyone. The old Damien was a fool, Damien said simply. Elena's nursing class was a blur. She couldn't focus, her mind constantly returning to Damien and his confession. After class, she wandered through a nearby park, trying to sort through her tangled emotions. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marco. Coming home for dinner? Sophia's making her famous mac and cheese. Elena smiled despite her turmoil. Her siblings had adapted so well to their new life. Sophia's health had improved with better medical care, and Marco was thriving in school, already receiving interest from college scouts for his soccer skills. Could she really disrupt their lives again by ending things with Damien? But staying for their sake wouldn't be fair either. Not to her, and not to Damien. As she walked, Eleanor passed a small jewelry store. In the window display was a simple silver locket, similar to one her mother had worn. On impulse, she went inside to look at it. It's beautiful, isn't it? The elderly shopkeeper said. Perfect for keeping those you love close to your heart. My mother had one like it, Eleanor explained. I lost it during the move after she died. The shopkeeper studied her. You've known loss? Yes, but you've known love too, the woman said, with surprising insight. Sometimes we're so afraid of losing again that we push away the love that's right in front of us. Eleanor looked up, startled by the woman's words. How did you... I've been married 50 years, dear. I know the look of someone struggling with matters of the heart. She took the locket from the display. Would you like to try it on? As Elena fastened the locket around her neck, she caught sight of her reflection. Beyond her own image, she saw a memory. Damien's face the night he'd confessed, raw with emotion and fear of losing her. Not the calculated expression of someone completing a bet, but the vulnerable look of a man in love. I'll take it, Eleanor decided suddenly. Outside, she opened the locket, wondering what photos she would place inside. Her parents, her siblings, her fingers traced the empty space, and she knew there was room for one more, if she could find the courage to trust again. When Eleanor arrived at the penthouse, she was surprised to find it quiet. No sign of Sophia or Marco, no smell of mac and cheese cooking. Instead, there was a note on the kitchen counter in Damien's handwriting. Follow the flowers. Puzzled, she noticed a single calla lily on the counter, pointing toward the living room. There she found another and another, creating a trail leading to the terrace. With growing curiosity, Eleanor followed the path of flowers. The terrace had been transformed. Strings of white lights illuminated the space, and in the center stood Damien, looking more nervous than she'd ever seen him. Behind him was a small table set for dinner with Sophia and Marco waiting nearby, both dressed up and grinning conspiratorially. What is this? Eleanor asked, taking in the scene. An apology, Damien said, and a second chance if you'll hear me out. Elena hesitated, then nodded. Damien gestured to the table, and Marco pulled out a chair for her with exaggerated formality, making her smile despite herself. We helped with everything, Sophia whispered loudly. Damien said we had to make it perfect. Once Elena was seated, Damien nodded to the children who retreated inside with barely contained excitement, leaving them alone. First, Damien began, sitting across from her, I need you to know that the bet is off. I told Victor today that high forfeit, whatever happens between us now, has nothing to do with any wager. You gave up the bet? Elena asked, surprised. Without hesitation. It meant nothing compared to what I stand to lose if you walk away. His eyes held hers. Elena, I won't make excuses for how this began. I was arrogant and selfish, and I treated our marriage like a game. But somewhere along the way, the game became real. You became real to me, more real than anything I've ever known. Elena felt tears forming. How can I trust that? How can I know what's genuine? Because I'm giving you the one thing I've never given anyone. He pulled an envelope from his jacket and placed it on the table. Complete control. Eleanor opened the envelope and gasped. Inside was a document transferring ownership of a trust fund worth $10 million to her name. Damien, what is this? The money I promised you, plus interest. It's yours regardless of what you decide about us. You can take it and leave today, knowing that you and your siblings will be secure. You're letting me go, she realized. I'm giving you the choice I should have given you from the beginning, he corrected. I promised you could walk away after 6 months with the money. I'm just making good on that promise early. Elena stared at the document, then back at Damien. And if I stay, then you stay because you want to, not because you need to. His voice wavered slightly. Not for a deal or an arrangement, but because what we've found together is worth fighting for. From inside the penthouse, music began to play, the song they had danced to at the charity gala. Damien stood and offered his hand. Will you dance with me, Elena? One last time if that's what you choose. Elena took his hand, allowing him to lead her into a slow dance under the stars. As they moved together, memories flooded back. His patient, teaching as Sophia learned to swim. His genuine pride when Marco scored the winning goal. His quiet support as she aced her first nursing exam. Moments that couldn't have been faked. Connections that had grown organically despite the deception at their beginning. I have something for you, Damien said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small box and opened it, revealing a simple diamond ring. This was my mother's. My father gave it to her when they had nothing, before the company, before the wealth. It was the only thing that mattered to her. Eleanor looked at the ring, then at Damien. What are you saying? I'm saying our first wedding was built on lies. I want our second one to be built on truth. He took a deep breath. I'm asking you to marry me again, Elena. For real this time. Not for a bet or a business deal, but because I love you. Because these past months have shown me what truly matters, and it's not my company or my money, it's you. It's the family we've become. Elena's heart raced as Damien continued. You don't have to answer now, he said. Take all the time you need. The ring, the money, they're yours regardless. I just want you to know that what I feel for you is the most real thing in my life. Eleanor touched the locket around her neck, thinking of the shopkeeper's words about pushing away love for fear of loss. She had lost so much already, her parents, her education, her simple life. But she had gained something too, not just financial, security, but a partner who saw her strength, who supported her dreams, who had grown from a selfish playboy into a man worthy of her love. Sophia and Marco are watching from the window, she said, glancing toward the glass doors where two faces quickly ducked out of sight. Damien smiled. They helped plan everything. Sophia said I had to make it romantic or you wouldn't say yes. And what do you think? Eleanor asked. Will I say yes? His expression grew serious. I hope with all my heart that you will. But I'll understand if you can't forgive the lie we started with. Elena was quiet for a long moment, considering everything. The hurt, the betrayal, but also the joy, the love, the family they had built. Ask me again, she finally said. Hope flared in Damien's eyes. He got down on one knee, still holding her hand. Elena Carter, will you marry me? For real this time, for always. In the periphery of her vision, Elena could see Sophia and Marco pressed against the window, holding their breath. But her focus remained on Damien, on the man she had come to know and love, flaws and all. Yes, she said, her voice steady and sure. Yes, I will. Damien's face transformed with joy. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the emotion of the past months, the uncertainty, the growing connection, the love that had blossomed despite everything. From inside came cheers as Sophia and Marco burst onto the terrace, unable to contain their excitement any longer. Sophia threw her arms around both of them, and Marco joined the embrace, the four of them holding each other as a family. I knew it, Sophia exclaimed. I knew you loved him for real. Elena laughed through her tears. When did you get so smart? Saw the way you looked at him, Sophia said with childish wisdom. Like Mom used to look at Dad. Damien's arms tightened around Elena. I promise you, he whispered, I will spend every day making sure you never regret this decision. I'm going to hold you to that, Elena replied, smiling up at him. For better or worse, remember? For better or worse, he agreed, his eyes shining with the promise of their future. 6 months later, the garden of the Sinclair estate was transformed with thousands of white flowers, creating a path to a flower-adorned arch where Damien waited nervously. Unlike their first wedding, this ceremony was attended by hundreds of guests, family, friends, business associates, all gathered to witness their public recommitment. In a room inside the main house, Elena stood in front of a mirror, admiring her wedding gown, not an extravagant designer creation, but a simple, elegant dress she had chosen herself. Sophia, serving as her maid of honor, adjusted the veil carefully. You look like a princess, she said, eyes wide with admiration. Elena smiled. How's Damien doing? Nervous, Marco reported, entering the room in his best man suit. He's checked. His pockets for the rings about 20 times. Tell him to relax, Elena said. I'm not going anywhere this time. As Marco left to deliver the message, Lucia came in to help with final preparations. I can't believe you're having a second wedding before I've had my first, she teased. Well, we did things backward, Elena admitted. Marriage first, love after. Sometimes the journey matters more than how you start, Lucia said, hugging her. Friend! When it was time, Elena walked down the aisle on Marco's arm, her eyes fixed on Damien. His face when he saw her was everything she could have hoped for. Love, wonder, and absolute certainty. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, written by them together in the weeks leading up to the ceremony. Elena, Damien began, his voice steady, despite the emotion in his eyes. When we first married, I thought I knew everything. I was wrong. You taught me what really matters. Love, family, honesty. Every day with you makes me a better man than I was the day before. I promise to love you truly and completely for the rest of our lives. Eleanor smiled through her tears as she spoke her own vows. Damien, our beginning was unconventional to say the least, but the journey we've taken together has brought me more joy than I ever thought possible. I promise to love you, to trust you, to build our family together for all the days to come. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, their kiss was met with thunderous applause. Sophia whooped loudly, making everyone laugh. As they turned to face their guests, Elena felt Damien squeeze her hand. Happy? He whispered. Completely, she assured him. At the reception, Victor approached them, looking genuinely moved by the ceremony. I owe you both an apology, he said. That stupid bet was the best thing that ever happened to me, Damien interrupted, his arm around Elena's waist. So in a way I should thank you. Still friends? Victor asked hopefully. Always, Damien assured him. Just no more bets involving my love life. Later, as they shared their first dance as a truly married couple, Elena looked around at the life they had built. Sophia and Marco laughing with their school friends, Lucia dancing with one of Damien's colleagues, Mrs. Reynolds watching proudly from the sidelines. A real family born from the most unexpected circumstances. What are you thinking? Damien asked, following her gaze. That some accidents turn out to be the best things that ever happened to us, Elena replied, resting her head on his shoulder. Damien tightened his arms around her. You were never an accident, Elena. You were a miracle, my miracle. As they danced under the stars, surrounded by the people they loved, Elena knew that what had begun as a joke, a billionaire marrying his maid on a bet, had become the greatest love story of their lives. Not perfect, not without its flaws and struggles, but real. Wonderfully, beautifully real, and in the end, that was all that mattered.